So as Claudia mentioned, I'm going to be talking about some of the animals that live in Antarctica and some of the special things that they do to live there. So as we've heard throughout some of the past presentations, Antarctica isn't really the nicest place to call home. First, I'm going to start by asking a question: what is an adaptation? So in a very simplified way, we can say there's a population of living organisms, and that could be animals, plants, whatever you'd like, and you apply a selective pressure to it. So that could be predation, change in the environment, and what you'll see is a change in your population. So this could be anything from a behavioral change to a change in form or even a change in color. And I'll give you guys an example of adaptation that we've been able to see in the modern day with peppered moths. There are two varieties of these peppered moths. So there's the Typica variety and the Carbonaria variety, and they're found throughout Europe. And they live on tree trunks in Europe, and in the pre-industrial area, the tree trunks were predominantly light-colored, and there were lots of lichens on it. So as you can see, it's pretty hard to find the Typica variety of moth, but I'll point it out for you. It blends in very well. And why this is important is that birds are their main predators. So if you stick out like a sore thumb, like the black one does, you're going to be pretty easy pickings. And the population of these moths reflected that. So the Typica variety of this moth in pre-industrial Europe made up about 98% of the population. Then we discovered coal. We decided to start burning it, and so we put a lot of soot into the atmosphere. And what this did is it turned the color of tree trunks black, and it killed a lot of the lichen on it. So as you can see now, the white moth doesn't blend in so well, and the black moth does. This had profound implications on the population, and the amount of black moths actually took over and made up around 98% of the population, while the white moths suffered because they were being picked off by birds. Now we move into post-industrial Europe. We've gotten away from burning coal, and as a result, there's not as much soot in the atmosphere. The trees have returned to their original color, the lichens have returned, and the moths have returned to their original population. And so what I've demonstrated here is that your environment can play a pretty integral role on whether or not you're able to survive in the short term and in the long term. So I'm going to move on to talking about extreme environments. We have many of them on our planet. They can be found from the bottom of the ocean to the top of mountains and everywhere in between in places such as deserts. And as you've heard throughout the night, Antarctica is a pretty extreme place, probably the most extreme place on this planet. And I'm going to outline a few things on why it's such a difficult place to live in. When you think of Antarctica, you think of cold. And you're right when you think that. So if you look at the star, that's around the area that we were. This is a map of the average summer temperature in Antarctica. So where we were, it was around -5 degrees Celsius on average. And as you move towards the center of the continent, the temperature begins to drop. And in the center, it's around -40 in the summer. So to give you a relative terms on that, our average Ottawa summer temperature is around 15 degrees. So it's quite a lot colder than what we have here. If we move to the winter temperature, we still have the same pattern, although it drops quite a bit. Where we were out on the peninsula, it drops around 5 degrees. But as you move inland, the changes are more pronounced. It reaches around -60 degrees Celsius, and in some places, the average temperature is -70 degrees. And again, to compare that to Ottawa, our average winter temperature is -3. So it's quite cold down there. In fact, the coldest temperature ever recorded was at Lake Vostok, where the ice core was taken that Andrew was talking about, -89 degrees Celsius. When we examine precipitation, it follows much the same pattern as temperature. So out towards the fringes of Antarctica, you get a lot more precipitation. And as you move inland, Antarctica becomes a polar desert, and there's almost no precipitation. This is a photo of some early Antarctic adventurers. And as you can see, it's not easy being there. And I just have a little newspaper clip from Ernest Shackleton. He's one of the most famous Antarctic explorers, and it reads like this: "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success." Now, whether or not this is real or not is another question, but it still gives you the example of this place is pretty harsh, and you don't want to be there. And Shackleton actually had over 5,000 applicants for this journey. So Yeah, pretty incredible. If we move a little bit into the past, we've seen this map before. This is during the time of the dinosaurs, 65 million years ago. You can see the world was a much different place. The ocean level was a lot higher. You can see some of Canada is inundated. Lots of South America is inundated. And the position of the continents is a little different. You can look at India. It's in the middle of the ocean. And one thing I want to point out is Australia down in the southern part. At this point, it's still connected to Antarctica. And it's above 70 degrees latitude. So think reverse whenever you think of latitude. The higher you up, the lower you go. And this is important. If we look at some of the animals that are found here, this is a dinosaur called Hypsilophodon. And in this environment, we think it was around 5 degrees Celsius on average. There was extreme seasonality where this guy was found. So you have really cold winters, really warm summers, and a polar light regime. Now, when I was talking about going above 70 degrees latitude, this is why it was so important, because you have 1 to 2 months of complete darkness. And this guy had some adaptations. So Hypsilophodon is found in other places throughout the world, but the fossils found in southern Australia, which was connected to Antarctica at this time, have very large eyes. So this is an adaptation that's thought to be restricted to the poles. There are also a few other adaptations that this guy had. If you look at his bones in cross-section, you could see that it didn't stop growing. So what this means is that he didn't hibernate. And also, some authors have suggested that it was too small to migrate long distances. So this had a lot of adaptations for living in a small area isolated to Antarctica. So at that time, you see, the temperatures may have been a little better, but some things remain the same. Your light regime won't change in polar continents. And you have to have some adaptations to live there. So if we move into the present, when you think of Antarctica, the animals you think of are penguins. These animals are extremely adapted for marine specializations. You can see their body form is very streamlined. They don't have any flight feathers, and they have a kind of a camouflage called countershading. So they have a white belly and a black back. And what this does is it allows them to blend into their environment, which is they're fully marine. You see this in a lot of animals that live in the oceans. Now we can ask ourselves, were penguins always this way? And the answer is no. If we look back 35 million years, there's a fossil penguin that's been found in Peru recently. And you can see that its body shape was fairly similar. So it was already adapted for marine life. It had a streamlined shape. It didn't have any flight feathers, but its color was a lot different. So with this fossil, they found feathers, and they were actually able to extract the color of this animal from the feathers. So you can see it has a reddish-brown stomach and a grayish back. So the colors aren't the same as today. Another difference that you see is its beak. It has a much larger beak, and they think that this is for preying on fish. When you look at modern penguins, as we heard earlier, krill play a really important role in the Antarctic ecosystem, so their beaks are adapted for eating krill. One last difference is the size. This penguin is massive. He stood about 1.5 meters tall and weighed close to 60 kilograms, so much larger than any penguin you see today. Another animal that we found in Antarctica were seals. So in Antarctica, there are 6 different types of seals, one of which is the crab eater. This seal doesn't actually eat crab. There aren't any crab in Antarctica. And it makes up over 50% of all the seals worldwide. So we ask ourselves, how is this guy so successful? And the answer, again, goes back to krill. This animal had a very specialized dentition for krill. If we look at its teeth, they're incredibly specialized. Out of all the carnivores, there's no other teeth that are this specialized. And it's kind of funny because they don't actually use them for chewing. So what they do is they do something similar to the baleen whales. They'll go take a mouthful of krill, and they'll eject all the water. So these teeth actually act as a sieve. They don't use them for mastication. And it's really kind of neat that these guys have flourished. And you got to ask yourself why. And back when Logan was talking, we learned about the whales and the whaling. So it's thought that with the decrease in whales in Antarctica, that crab-eater seals have been able to take advantage of this abundant food source, and that's why they make up over 50% of all seals found today. I'm going to touch a little bit on Antarctic ecology. We've seen a little bit about this, and I'm going to break it down a little further. This is going to be a very simplified food web. Everything on the Earth's surface starts with the sun. This feeds our primary producers, which are phytoplankton, diatoms, as we learned earlier. and they're an important food source for krill and for salps. As we learned before in some of the previous talks, krill are a very important species. They're keystone species for many other animals in Antarctica. So there are either animals that feed directly on krill, or there are animals that feed on the animals that eat krill. Now I'm going to give you a few facts about these two different animals. They're actually quite different. Krill are a crustacean, so they're related to arthropods, lobsters, and stuff like that. Salps are tunicates, and they're related to chordates, and they're essentially just little soft jellies. Krill, as I mentioned, very important in the Antarctic ecosystem. They're a keystone species. Salps have no dietary value whatsoever. Krill have a very active lifestyle, relatively speaking. They feed on ice algae, while salps are filter feeders. They float through the water, and whatever comes by, they take in. Another important aspect is krill have a much longer lifespan. It takes them longer to reproduce and become sexually mature, while salps have a 1-year lifespan. So they don't depend on various factors for very long. And perhaps one of the most interesting associations is krill are very dependent with extensive ice cover, while salps, they don't do so well with ice. And one of the reasons for this is because, as I mentioned earlier, krill are active predators. They go under the ice and feed on ice algae. So the more ice there is, the more food there is for them. While salps, whenever the ocean opens up, there's a lot of primary production, and they do very well. So this has pretty far-reaching implications when you think of our food web and of climate change. If we look at our food web again, and you're looking at, as we've seen, a warming planet, what do we see? We see that the salps may have an opportunity to do better, and krill will decrease. So as a result, the rest of the food web suffers. And this isn't very good because we saw that Antarctica is connected globally. It's really important that this ecosystem does well. And so I'll just point out a few implications of our talk. So we have animals who live in Antarctica have extreme adaptations to live in this harsh environment. They do really special things to live here. If you change the climate, you could change these Antarctic ecosystems. And since these animals are so specialized, they've evolved to live in this environment, and changes could be detrimental to them. So on behalf of all of us, I'd just like to thank you for your attention tonight. And yeah, thank you.